Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty fascinating exploration of why your instinct to hesitate might actually be your greatest hidden asset.
It really feels like we live in a world that just constantly glorifies reckless risk-taking. We love those stories of adventurous leaps into the unknown. And because of that, it's incredibly common to wonder if our own natural caution is just, well, fear in disguise, holding us back from our true potential. So we have to ask, are you playing it too safe, or are you secretly wielding a superpower that everybody else just misunderstands?
To answer that, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to cover, are you too cautious? The brain's caution hub, prudence, charioteer of virtues, fear versus mindful caution, and finally, the power of the pause. All right, part one. Are you too cautious? Let's start this off with a little bit of self-reflection.
Okay, so these signs might actually look like massive achievements at first glance. I mean, a 90% success rate, absolutely zero regrets, sounds pretty great, right? But clinical psychologists actually warn that this means you probably aren't experimenting enough. Think about it. If you have absolutely no recent regrets, it likely means you've researched every little thing so heavily that you're entirely avoiding interpersonal risks. You might even find yourself consistently picking the muted options, like grabbing that safe, neutral gray t-shirt instead of the vibrant one, just to avoid even the slightest discomfort of the unknown.
But there's a real trade-off here. Research shows that being highly cautious gives us excellent crisis management skills and long-term security. You basically become the go-to person who is always prepared for the absolute worst-case scenario. However, that comes with a massive opportunity cost, because if your caution is dialed up just a bit too high, it narrows your focus strictly to what might go wrong, keeping you from stepping into the unknown and discovering new possibilities for growth. Which brings us to part two, the brain's caution hub. And here is where we're going to execute a pretty hard pivot. Because caution isn't just a personality quirk or some psychological habit you picked up. Recent scientific research reveals it's a highly evolved biological mechanism. Deep inside your forebrain is this tiny, fascinating cluster of neurons called the subthalamic nucleus, or STN for short. In this incredible study where they tracked the brain activity of freely moving mice, researchers discovered that this tiny area functions as the brain's absolute headquarters for cautious actions. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that the SDN doesn't just passively reflect movement. It's not just a basic on-off switch for your muscles. Instead, it actively integrates sensory signals, motor functions, and punidate, meaning negative signals, to guide adaptive, cautious behavior when you're under threat. So when you vacillate for a second before crossing a really busy street, your SDN is firing. It is perfectly balancing your urgency to move with your need to deliberate. Scientists have actually mapped out what they call type C neurons within the STN, and honestly, the data is completely groundbreaking. These specific neurons literally fire in anticipation of an avoidance action, meaning they activate before the physical action even happens. This proves that biological caution is a highly sophisticated planning tool. It's an anticipatory cognitive signal, not just a physical reflex to something scary. Your brain is quite literally hardwired to pause, calculate, and then act cautiously. All right. Part 3, prudence, charioteer of virtues. Now that we see caution is this incredible tool hardwired right into our biology, let's zoom out of it. Because ancient philosophers actually recognized this exact same concept centuries ago and elevated it to an art form. The ancients called this concept prudence. Thinkers like Epicurus and much later Thomas Aquinas absolutely revered it. In fact, they often referred to prudence as the charioteer of the virtues or the mother of all virtues. Why? Because it directs and regulates every other human excellence. Without prudence or mindful caution, bravery just becomes foolhardiness, and selflessness can become easily corrupted. You might remember Aristotle famously argued that true virtue is always a golden mean, sitting perfectly between two extremes. Let's apply that to caution. On one extreme, you have a total deficiency of caution, which is recklessness. On the exact opposite extreme, you have an excess of caution, which is cowardice or total paralysis. So a prudent, cautious person isn't a coward at all. They are perfectly balanced right in that golden mean, evaluating the risk but still moving forward. To actually practice this ancient virtue in your own modern life, later philosophers argued you must master two integral things. First is memoria, which basically means having an accurate memory that is true to reality, allowing you to genuinely learn from your past mistakes. The second is doctilitas, which is having the humility and open-mindedness to seek out and actually use the experience of others. Moving right along to part 4, fear versus mindful caution.
With all this ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience in mind, we have to make a sharp distinction that completely changes how we operate today. We really have to separate caution from fear. They are two totally different beasts. Fear is a feeling. It's this heavy, constricting, emotional reaction rooted in uncertainty, and it almost always leads to paralysis. You just freeze. Caution, on the other hand, is an action. It's an intentional, grounded, and incredibly empowering choice, where you thoughtfully assess the risk and proceed anyway. Caution doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It just means you aren't letting the fear dictate your outcome. Now, if we scale this whole idea of mindful caution all the way up to the level of global policy, we get something called the precautionary principle. And this represents a massive paradigm shift in international law. Instead of relying on post-damage control, waiting for a disaster to happen and then pointing fingers and assigning liability, we shift to pre-damage anticipation for uncertain, potentially catastrophic risks, things like climate change or new, unproven technologies. This principle essentially acts as a giant appeal to prudence for our policymakers when a risk is scientifically plausible but impossible to perfectly quantify. It practically proves that the old idiom, better safe than sorry, isn't just a folk saying. It is literally a legally recognized, deeply rational approach to managing large-scale ignorance and uncertainty in our world. Finally, Part 5, the power of the pause. We've looked at the brain, the philosophers, and global policy. But how do we practically apply this incredible tool to our own fast-paced lives? Well, the expert advice here comes from business strategist Alfonso Cajero, who points out a pretty fundamental flaw in how we handle stress. Under severe pressure, our field of view just shrinks. Our brains desperately want to relieve the tension instantly, which ironically compromises our judgment right when we need it the absolute most. We just reach for the fastest option to make the discomfort stop, mistaking that speed for strong leadership. To combat that trap, Cairo recommends actually engineering slowness directly into your workflow. When you're hit with a high-stakes decision, you need to take a single, deliberate beat. You pause just long enough for your initial physical reflexes to pass. This gives you the mental space to ask yourself, is this situation genuinely urgent, or is it just my own internal discomfort demanding an answer right now? Because ultimately, good decision-making under pressure is really just the discipline of distinguishing what is genuinely urgent from what merely feels urgent. Decisiveness isn't about speed. True leadership and true effectiveness actually come from having the disciplined stillness to pause, buy yourself some room, and decide on the actual merits of a situation rather than just reacting to the pressure. So the next time you're facing a high-stakes moment or you feel that pressure mounting, remember the research we've covered today. Your brain's STN is biologically built to help you calculate those threats. So take that deliberate beat, channel the ancient virtue of prudence, and turn your natural hesitation into your greatest advantage. Will you let fear paralyze you, or will you use mindful caution to master the pause? Think about that the next time you're pressured to make a split-second choice. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.